LBMC's Cybersecurity Sense podcast. This week, we will be discussing the direct risks we are seeing with remote access to companies' networks. My name is Bill Dean, Senior Manager here at LBMC Security. While involved in various aspects of our various security services, I'm also the practice lead for our incident response, forensics, and litigation support practice. This week, I want to discuss with you the security risks of allowing remote access to Windows servers on your network. So, a little bit of background. Remote access to networks is commonplace in today's IT environments, and we get this. So it's mainly used for IT support, your power users, especially your developers. It's essential. They have to do their job, maintenance, code upgrades, those types of things. However, this capability can be provided in a safe and secure manner, but it can also be deployed in a manner that leaves the organization at great risk, which is going to be the primary topic of this podcast. So remote desktop, also known as terminal services, when not deployed properly, is a severe risk to your organization. So you've deployed firewalls to block internet connections that you deem to be of risk. You also deploy intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems to detect and block internet traffic into your network that you think is dangerous. However, enabling remote desktop bypasses these controls and places your system, if not your entire network, at risk of compromise. Data breaches, the system networks, everything are at risk when you're doing this. So when remote desktop is enabled, attackers can brute force the administrator credentials because you cannot lock out the account. With normal accounts, 5 or 8 bad attempts, it locks the account. Administrator account does not fall under that same type of policy. So they can continue to send as many username and password combinations as they want until they find the correct combination. It's just a matter of time. With this access, your entire network could be at risk of both compromise and data theft. So a lot of this, the reason this podcast came about is twofold. First, we've been working a lot of compromises, dealing with bad guys compromising terminal services or remote desktop. The second part of it is that a Security Affairs article from Rapid7 that stated, so Rapid7 is a computer security software and consulting company. They reported that there are 4.1 million devices on the internet that have remote desktop terminal services exposed to the internet. 28.8% or 1 million of those devices are in the United States. So it states that the number is shockingly high when you remember that remote desktop is effectively a way to expose keyboard, mouse, and ultimately the Windows desktop over the network. It's like the attacker is sitting at the machine itself. The Rapid7 researchers pointed out that even if RDP or remote desktop is disabled by default on Windows, it is commonly exposed on internal networks for administration and maintenance purposes. It is mainly an internal tool to do maintenance on the systems. It was not designed to be exposed to the internet. The remote desktop protocol poses serious risks. Microsoft has addressed dozens of vulnerabilities in the remote desktop protocol over the past 15 years. Even the NSA has been documented to use zero-day exploits on remote desktop. So remote desktop is on everyone's radar as an attack vector into networks, even that have a lot of security controls in place. So the remote desktop protocol attacks are a privileged attack vector for malware distribution, especially ransomware. Those are some of the notes from the article, but I want to give a little bit more context from our incident response practice. So these statistics are not just for discussion on this podcast. This is a real-world threat that is actually pretty common. So our incident response practice has been working numerous of these attacks against remote desktop using brute force password attacks. In fact, as I'm recording this podcast, we're finishing up a report for an organization that fell prey to this. Ironically, there's probably been up to, on that specific attack, there were 9 different attackers that logged onto that system for more than months that were logging on and doing different things. Eventually, they just deployed ransomware, which was lucky for the client. So when the system gets compromised via remote desktop, the best case scenario is that the systems are just turned into Bitcoin mining bots. So they just want the horsepower to mine Bitcoins. Or maybe the attackers will pivot from the compromised device to conduct financial fraud, using the web browser to file fraudulent tax returns. Of course, it's going to look like it's coming for your organization, which is not good. However, the attack can go downhill from there. Many manual ransomware infections. Unfortunately, ransomware, which we'll talk about more in another podcast, many times it's an opportunistic attack. You opened an email that was sent to thousands of people, or you went to the wrong website. However, through terminal services, the ransomware infections are manual. The attacker logs onto your system, deletes the backups that it can find and the volume shadow copies, and then deploys the ransomware. So that means they are interactively on your system when they deploy the ransomware. However, unfortunately, we also have had to convey the bad news on numerous times to the clients in which the compromise was actually a data breach involving personally identifiable information, electronic patient health information, or PHI, and unfortunately, there were some public disclosures that were needed. So as you can see, that attack vector is used for numerous ways for bad guys to do bad things on your system. So with all that bad news, let's talk about some ways that you can protect yourself. First is the obvious: do not permit remote desktop capabilities to the internet. Now, we realize that they may not be feasible in all situations, but if it's not possible to turn it off, force multi-factor authentication. And you're going to hear that theme over and over and over in this podcast. Keep in mind, RSA no longer has that expensive monopoly on multi-factor authentication. In the show notes, I'm going to provide some other low-cost options that you can actually do multi-factor authentication. With these options, there's really no reason not to do it. Even with multi-factor authentication enabled, enable network-level authentication to prevent or at least slow down brute force password attacks. So some of these detailed articles on how to do this, obviously we're going to have in the show notes. A proactive measure in every instance in which we've worked this out of my practice is if the organization would have performed an external penetration test to determine if there are instances of remote desktop enabled, it would have prevented the attack. Many times the companies don't know that it's there. The vendor has set it up, or some third party's done it, or it's set up for a convenience factor for a weekend to do an upgrade, but then no one turns it off. Penetration tests will find this. A Nessus scan is not going to tell you, or a vulnerability scan is not going to tell you that this is a risk to your environment. However, we will, or another penetration testing company will. Like I said, the penetration test would have noted this as a risk that needed to be mitigated. If they would have done that on the front end, the compromise probably would not have occurred. So as I mentioned, there's going to be some more tips on locking down terminal services in the show notes. In the event that through this podcast you look and find that remote desktop has been enabled to be accessible via the internet and are a bit concerned, there really is a simple way to gauge whether or not additional analysis is going to be needed. If the system is behaving slowly, you're probably part of a Bitcoin mining bot or something like that. There's actually a log that Windows maintains that has login information relevant to successful logons via remote desktop. So it'll be in the show notes, but it is the Microsoft Windows Terminal Services Local Session Manager operational log. This log provides date, time, the account that was used to log in, and then the IP address that it was used to log in from. You can take the IP address and using many of the IP geolocation sources, you can look up the IP addresses to determine if some of the logons are from other locations that are of concern to you. And we know if it's outside the United States, you probably want to be able to see that. So this log is not going to tell you what happened when they logged on, what activities were conducted, whether or not data was taken, but it will tell you if people that should not be accessing your system have logged on. And then it may take a forensic analysis to determine what happened. Was it just that system? Was it the entire network? So there's some information on the risk of remote access. Hopefully you'll provide some value on that. As always, some upcoming speaking engagements. Mark Burnett, shareholder here at LBMC Security, will be giving his Dear President Trump Top Ways to Secure the U.S. talk at InfoSec Nashville on September 19th. More details will be in the show notes. I will be speaking at the Utility Technology Association on October 18th in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Again, more details in the show notes. I'm also going to be speaking at the 29th Annual Health Law Forum. It's going to be held October 5th and 6th in Franklin, Tennessee. So in closing, thank you for listening. I hope you have a great week. You can actually now subscribe to the LBMC Security Sense podcast in iTunes. The link to do so will be in the show notes. To learn more about LBMC Security and the services we provide, please visit lbmcsecurity.com. Thank you.